Good afternoon. I'm Dina Ladd, the Executive Director for the Missouri Cures Education Foundation. Our mission is to promote and protect medical research in the state of Missouri. I would like to thank the sponsors of this event, Rivervest, Washington University here in St. Louis University Research, and Mid-America Transplant. Thank you. I would like to thank our speakers for taking time out of their busy days. They're all very passionate about moving cures and therapies forward for rare disease. And I would like to thank participants. We have not only participants in the state of Missouri, but all around the country. So welcome. As we go through the discussion, please put questions in the chat box. We will have Q&A at the end of the discussion, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If you're following us on social media, please use the hashtag RareMO. Now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Sessions Cole of Washington University School of Medicine and Principal Investigator for the Undiagnosed Disease Network for the National Institute of Health. Dr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Dina. Let me share my screen here. I can figure out hold on one second here. I'm trying to find the right screen to share here. Oops. That is. Can you see my screen now?
We can.
Yes.
Let's see here. I am having a little trouble with screen sharing. Hold on one second here. So can you see that one?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're moving in the right direction here. So I want to thank Dina Ladd and the Missouri Cures Foundation for the opportunity to participate in the Rare Disease Virtual Symposium that's aimed at helping raise awareness of rare diseases and provide information to those who are living with rare diseases. Unifying our local and regional rare disease communities is critical to improve funding for rare diseases care and research, to ensure equity in access of rare disease patients to state-of-the-art medical care and research, and to link rare disease patients and their families for support and advice. In the arc of the disease journey for rare disease patients and their families, finding a diagnosis is a key milestone. A diagnosis helps define disease prognosis and possible treatments, as well as provide access for patients and families to rare disease communities. Diagnosis may also provide prevention strategies for the patient or family members and prediction of future reproductive risk. I will briefly summarize the background and work of a national network, the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, or UDN, that has focused over the last decade on leveraging rapid advances in gene code deciphering and reduction in costs for gene code deciphering to solve medical mysteries in undiagnosed disease patients who have been on prolonged diagnostic odysseys. The UDN is supported by the National Institutes of Health to develop best practices for solving medical mysteries and for understanding the causes of rare diseases. I will briefly summarize the UDN's background and success. So one of the major backgrounds for the UDN is the continuing decrease in cost of DNA sequencing. On this graph, you can see the cost on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And as you can see, when the Human Genome Project first started sequencing a whole human genome, the cost was hundreds of millions of dollars. And now the cost is about $1,000 or sometimes less. And so this cost reduction has significantly improved our ability to make diagnoses and find diagnoses in patients with rare diseases. And that success is reflected here. This first DNA sequencing of the whole genome was done by a technique that has now been replaced by something called next generation sequencing. And you can see that the advent of next generation sequencing has led to a distinct increase in the number of new disease-causing genes discovered per year. And finally, there have been advances in genomic medicine thanks to patient partnerships. And this is a very abbreviated list of examples of important organizations that represent patient partnerships and try to accelerate rare disease discovery and diagnosis. So establishing a diagnosis, as I indicated, for patients with complex problems and symptoms or combinations of symptoms can be a long diagnostic process. And these long diagnostic odysseys have substantial costs for patients, for families, and for society. Undiagnosed patients are those who have no diagnosis after an appropriate and extensive clinical evaluation, and they may have received some amount of genetic testing, like a chromosomal microarray analysis. The Orphan Drug Act of 1983 and the Rare Disease Act of 2002 define rare diseases as conditions that affect less than 200,000 people in the United States. But I think, as many of us recognize, many of these people are basically N of 1 or 1 to 100 rare disease examples. And the total number of rare disease individuals in the United States is estimated at 25, somewhere between 25 and 40 million. And the causes of rare and undiagnosed diseases have not been systematically compared and studied, but estimates are that approximately 80% of rare disease patients have genetic causes, and the remainder are caused by environment, cancer, infection, and autoimmune problems. And approximately 50% of the patients who are affected by rare diseases are children, and 30% of these children will not live beyond 5 years. And most importantly, 95% of rare diseases lack FDA-approved treatment. So in 2008, at the National Institutes of Health, Dr. William Gall established a program at the NIH called the Undiagnosed Diseases Program, in which he proposed to bring patients with undiagnosed diseases to the NIH and to provide them with a careful cataloging of all their symptoms and problems, as well as with, at that time, whole exome sequencing, or looking at all the base pairs, all the DNA in the individual, as well as in the affected person's parents. In 2014, the Undiagnosed Diseases Network was established as a national network, which basically expanded from 1 to 6, the number 1 at the NIH to 6, the number of patients, a number of centers who were doing diagnoses. And then in phase 2 of the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, the number of clinical sites was expanded to 12. And here you can see the UDN central components, which include a review board, because each one of these patients is like an N of 1 experiment. In addition, there's a sequencing center at Baylor, a metabolomics center at the Mayo Clinic, where tests are run for looking for specialized biochemical or other signatures, which may help with the diagnosis. There's a model organism screening core housed at Baylor, as well as at WashU, which helps to take variants, genomic code issues discovered in patients and test them in model organisms like fruit flies, worms, and zebrafish. We also have a central biorepository at Vanderbilt for specimens from patients, a coordinating center at Harvard, and 12 clinical sites. And each clinical site evaluates 15 to 30 patients per year. Here is the distribution of the sites across the United States. And as you can see, there is some reasonable amount of clinical site distribution to try to optimize geographic access to the network. Here is an example of our progress in solving medical mysteries. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2018. There were 382 patients at that time who had completed evaluation, and 35% of those, or 132 of those patients, received a diagnosis thanks to the UDN evaluation. Just clinical review. So in other words, just taking the patients and having the experts crowdsource their expertise and look at what had already been done for the patient resulted in 11% of the patients receiving a diagnosis. There was directed clinical testing that also resulted in another 11% receiving a diagnosis. There was non-sequencing genome-wide diagnostic assays accounted for a small proportion, but the majority of the diagnoses in this cohort was made by exome or genome sequencing. The unfortunate news is that 65% of these patients remain undiagnosed in 2018. So here's the current status through about a week ago of the Undiagnosed Diseases Network. The Undiagnosed Disease Network has received about 4,500 applications. They have evaluated about 1,400 patients, and they have provided diagnoses for 430 of these patients for about a 30% diagnostic success rate. And there have been 96 different manuscripts published from this experience, which basically describe the new diseases that have been recognized in this cohort. The Undiagnosed Diseases Network funding from the National Institutes of Health expires in June of 2020. And we are hopeful that there will be federal funding continuation for the UDN. And we are also looking for partnerships with third-party payers, pharmaceutical companies, philanthropic agencies, rare disease patient organizations, and academic medical centers. I wanted to give a shout out to our UDN WashU site team. It takes a village, and these are some of the people who make it happen. And here is my contact information if individuals have further questions. Again, I'd like to thank Dina for the opportunity to participate, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Sorry, I was muted. So what I was saying was, thank you, Dr. Cole. I'm one of your biggest fans, as you know, and I really appreciate you being a part of this event today, and all of the information and the statistics that you provided really shows the urgency of diagnosing these rare diseases and finding therapies and cures. So thank you. And let me remind people, we're getting a lot of Q&A. We're getting a lot of questions in the chat box, but we will try to get to the majority of your questions at the end of the discussion. So now it's a great honor to introduce our next speaker. She's coming to us from Orange County, California. She is a passionate advocate for rare disease. She is the founder of Global Genes, and last year became the co-founder of RareX. So Nicole Boice.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Yes. Okay, great. Sharing screen. So first of all, thank you, Dina and Missouri Cures, and also a special shout out to Kelly Ranallo from Rare KC, who made some of these important introductions. The purpose of my discussion today is really to kind of talk about the landscape and how it's evolved over the last decade. And in particular, I know we have a lot of different individuals from within this broader ecosystem in the life sciences and specifically interested or working in rare disease. But the purpose really of today was to kind of showcase my why, what has evolved over the last decade, and really encourage individuals and especially patients to kind of find their lane and figure out ways that you can get involved, even if it's just ensuring that your family can thrive and survive within this crazy world of rare disease. So with that, on to my why. So I know that a lot of people in rare disease, and I think this is what makes it so unique, has a why. There's something that was a catalyst that has encouraged and brought people into this world of rare disease, because it's not easy and it's hard. And there's a lot of negatives, but there is so many extraordinary elements and people. And you'll hear from many of them today on this panel that is responsible for the extraordinary growth over the last decade in rare disease. But this is my why. So 20 years ago, my dear friend's son was born locally in Laguna Beach. And he was born with extra fingers and toes and bowed bones and wasn't thriving in the hospital. They thought he was blind, and ultimately was sent home with no prognosis and no diagnosis. Now, someone like myself, who's always had your feet in the life sciences, I thought that this was strange. It was disturbing because I thought, how is it possible, smack in the middle of some of the best healthcare in the world, can my friends not find answers? And imagine, and many of you here, have either had to say those words, send patients and families home with no answers, but also our parents and patients themselves. And that lack of information, and like what Dr. Cole said, I mean, that's a start to everything. And when you don't have that, it's just difficult to even take a next step forward. So after 4 years of searching and a lot of people and conversations and tests, Derek finally got a diagnosis of Joubert syndrome, and it was a fluke diagnosis through a physical therapist. He, with the support of an extraordinary family and moving to an extraordinary community out of California into Montana, has thrived and has pretty much, developed as an individual and in ways that I don't think his family ever expected. So most recently, as part of the condition, he had a kidney transplant. His mother was the donor, and he is doing very well, I'm happy to say. But this is my why. And at the time, as I was sitting in the world of biopharma, I think what I didn't realize was that this world of rare disease really existed. And I know that Dr. Cole had shared some of the statistics, but the number of individuals that are impacted by rare disease that we know of today are pretty extraordinary. It makes rare disease the largest disease community on the planet, with over 400 million people worldwide impacted. As Dr. Cole said, right now, there's a huge opportunity for us to make an impact. Less than 5% of the now 9,500 rare diseases have a known therapy or treatment. The burden and the weight of this on families is extraordinary, and you will hear from him some of these amazing advocates on the panel today. And the lack of access to a lot of the tools and resources, access to whole genome sequencing, access to answers is burdensome and difficult. And so this, when I started seeing this whole world of rare disease emerge, coupled with the experience with my dear friend, it's what drew me to try to start something to make a difference. So my journey over the last decade and where I am today is this. In 2008, at the start of the recession, I left a very well-paying job to start Global Genes. And at the time, it was really about how can we kind of embrace and build bridges between this very large community and all of these different rare diseases, and show this community that there's actually a network of networks of patients. The idea was, how can we come together to learn from one another, not having to recreate the wheel? So we started building out this network of extraordinary individuals and patients who were breaking down barriers and thinking outside the box and actually driving so much of what was happening within their disease. Over the course of the last decade, probably like 4 years into that, this journey started, and the work that we were doing started evolving, because the patient responsibility started evolving. No longer was it just about love and hugs. Patients We're becoming drivers. And I'll share more about this. And so Global Genes as an organization had to start evolving because the responsibilities on the heads of patients in rare disease became much more than sitting over in a corner, sharing feedback every once in a while and participating in clinical trials. And so we as an organization started to evolve. And over the last 2 years, we've been working on that what's next. Global Genes still exists as an extraordinary organization that is working to help educate and ensure that patient advocates throughout this journey are supported. And now with RareX, what we're doing is bringing forward what we believe will be transformative in rare disease, where we're looking at building out and bringing forward a federated data sharing platform in rare disease that will interconnect disparate data sets in ways that keep in mind IP, keep in mind different business models, et cetera. And then we're also looking at building a data collection effort that is based on structured data, the best questions, flexible governance, overarching governance and support. And the purpose is we're working to tackle 3 specific things. The silos that exist in rare disease, because we know if we want to build a vibrant ecosystem of discovery, we have to think differently moving forward. We want to help support patients because the majority now are collecting data that's unusable, whether it's questions, whether it's where they're collecting data. It's not governed properly. It's not research ready. That needs to change. And we need to be able to do it faster, smarter, easier, and remove those barriers to access. And then last but not least is there is a long tail in rare disease, small organizations that have nothing. They don't have the resources, the money, the time. We need to do better for those communities and provide them, remove barriers and provide them with access to all these important tools so that they can be participants. So what do I mean by participants? This is kind of, and we know that this isn't linear, but this is an ecosystem slide that kind of talks about the world that patient advocates live in today. There's 3 buckets. The day-to-day grind of living with a rare disease. Sometimes that's all that patient advocates and parents can manage, right? That in itself is a huge hurdle. But what we've seen is an opportunity for patients to not only become architects of what is happening from a healthcare perspective within their own home, but also within their disease community. And then last but not least, now we have patient advocates that are literally seed funding early stage research. They're bringing forward the right data to be shared at the right time that is accelerating interest in future treatments, therapies, and cures. We have patients that are driving investment and even starting biotech efforts. So the role of patients is vast, and the importance of the work and the partnership that is coming out of the patient community is what has evolved. No more is it just about a patient voice in the corner. Now it's about patients being at the table, sitting there, vital partners in helping bring forward treatments, therapies, and cures. In addition, we know that the drug development cycle is long and arduous and costly, but envision a world where patient advocates now become active participants throughout this whole continuum, throughout the drug development cycle. What Global Genes has done has tried to help educate and provide tools and resources so patients know at what point they can be participants, and participants, not a voice, where they can sit at the table and help drug developers do better, faster, saving time and money, and helping everyone accelerate future treatments, therapies, and cures. And then what RareX is doing is now kind of layering data collection and data sharing that will also help advance kind of the drug development cycle. So the purpose of today for those patients that are involved and sitting on this call is that there is a heck of a lot of work to be done. As Dr. Cole said, it takes a village. We need people popping in where they feel comfortable throughout that continuum. And so I just want to encourage everyone to never doubt that you can have an impact. You just need to find your lane, what resonates with you, where you feel your abilities can play a role. But the big takeaway is that rare disease needs you. It's not a nice to have, it's a have to have. Disease communities are too small, so your involvement is critical. And so find what you know that you can support. And then last, for those in industry and those that are thinking about research in rare disease, please, 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 the takeaway for you all is that you can never start communicating with patients early. There's never too early. As soon as you're thinking about something, go and find those patients. They can be vital participants very early on in helping fundraise and helping identify people and partners. They can help design clinical trials so that you don't make mistakes and go down a path that isn't relevant. So please note, patient advocates should be sitting at the table. They're vital partners in this whole extraordinary ecosystem in rare disease, and they can absolutely help accelerate drug development like we've never seen before. Thank you so much. That's my contact info. Thank you, Missouri Cures.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Nicole. Your vision, your passion, everything you've done. As you said, you're transforming the rare disease community. So thank you for being with us today. And Nicole will be back for the Q&A. Again, if you have a question, put it in the chat box. We're going to do the Q&A at the end of the discussion. And I know a lot of you are wondering if we're recording this. Yes, we are. We'll be sending everyone a link that's registered. It'll be on our Facebook page and on our YouTube. So now to move on to our panel discussion. I'm very excited. Each speaker has had their own journey and their own story on why they became involved in the rare disease community. I really appreciate their time today and their willingness to share their stories. We have Dionne Stalling. She's the founder and executive director of Rare in Black. Kelly Ranallo, founder of Rare KC, founder and president of the Turner Syndrome Global Alliance. Fran Sverdrup, PhD, he's an associate professor of biochemistry at St. Louis University School of Medicine. And Stephanie Snow-Gavel, she is the chairman and CEO of the Snow Foundation. So welcome, everyone. So we're going to start with really hearing your story. Why are you a part of this community? And once you or your loved one received a diagnosis, how did you coordinate the specialist, the physicians? Were there programs that were available to assist? So Kelly, I'd like to start with you.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Dina, and thanks for everybody taking time out of their day to join this conversation about rare disease. I think it's challenging, and I think you'll hear this from all of us as either parents or patient advocates, that getting a diagnosis, as Dr. Cole pointed out, that is the first step. But once you get that diagnosis, and for some of us, as it was shared earlier, that can take an average of 8 to 10 years in the rare disease community. So finding those specialists, finding those physicians, but then once you get that diagnosis, the question always becomes, then what? What now? What do we do with that now? So my daughter was diagnosed at the age of 8.5 with Turner syndrome. My husband and I, we actually lost our second daughter, Katie, at the age of 5 months to a misdiagnosed rare disease. But even after having that in our family and going through genetic testing, we still spent another 5 years being that hypervigilant mom to find a diagnosis for Ellie. So once we got that diagnosis, then became the challenge of how do we find the experts and the specialists that really understand this disease that can provide us the best education and, as a parent, the best hope for the most ideal outcome for our daughter. We're very fortunate as a family. We had the resources. We could travel around the United States to go access those specialists. Not every family has that. In fact, most families don't. And so I think that's a big challenge with the rare disease community is how do we find those doctors that are specialists? And in the rare disease, they don't always happen to be in your hometown. And so how to connect with it. And so that's what we did. We were able to partner with Children's Mercy. And actually, Nicole Boice and Global Genes came into this process too, because you find yourself now not only advocating for your child or yourself, but how do we make it better for other families? And so connected early with Global Genes, they did exactly what Nicole says they do very well, which is they really foster and help you grow your knowledge and your expertise of how to be a better advocate. How can you use your voice? How can you partner with other advocacy organizations, groups, to be able to give you that knowledge, to be able to move it forward. So I know there's a lot of other stories to share here as well too, but definitely has been a journey. And we're now at that point where Rare X is coming into play, which is we've created this network of care centers, but now we're trying to self-build a patient registry from the ground up. And as Nicole said, we've raised over $125,000 to support that effort, but it's not nearly enough to make it sustainable. And so how can we do this better, faster? And how can we be able to de-silo the rare disease community, partner with our industry partners to be able to really advance and move the needle in new treatments and cures?
Thank you, Kelly. Dionne, if you could share your story with us.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's really a refreshing thing. I am a middle-aged woman that got diagnosed with something from birth. I actually suffer from several rare diseases, and I initially, over the course of my whole life, was chronic sinus infections, chronic other infections that seem to never go away. And you hear the doctors, you're not finishing your medicine. What were you eating? Your antibiotics, or you're not doing something right. And so after a hysterectomy that went awry, and I hemorrhaged and almost passed away, over the course of probably 6.5 months, I was in the hospital probably an average of 20 days. And my home healthcare nurse actually is the person that probably saved my life, because she said she smelled me outside, which meant that the infection, she could smell it from her car. I got a totally separate group of doctors at a different hospital, because she said, if they don't open you back up, you're going to die. And of course, no doctor will go behind another surgeon. Most doctors won't, but I was lucky that I found a guy that was willing to take me. And that surgery, he had to close me up because I was in my whole body, basically my abdomen was infected. And so we got that corrected, and I had MRSA and staph. And so he said, we'll get you together. Don't worry about it. And they did. But the problem was, every time that I've had surgery, including the births of my children, I always got infected, and that infection would last for over a year. And so I was assigned to the same infectious disease doctor. And I saw him for a few years, but he still couldn't figure it out. And he was like, there's something wrong with your immune system. Let's test you for AIDS and see if you have AIDS. When was the last time you had an AIDS test? And so we got tested. I got tested, and we figured out that's not what it was. And he referred me to an immunologist. And on November 11th, 2014, I sat in my doctor's office and I told her what was going on. It took her 7 minutes to tell me what was wrong with me. She said, pending your test, but I think I know what's wrong with you. And I was 45 years old. And she told me, that was on, I think, a Wednesday or a Thursday. She called me Monday and she told me exactly what I had, which is primary immune deficiency. And I didn't know what that was. And she said, do you remember the boy in the bubble? And I was like, yeah, I remember him. Similar disease, in the same class, not the same disease, but that's how I was diagnosed. And since then, because of surgeries, I have some other rare diseases. The reason that I founded Rare and Black is because when I go around the country and I'm on panels or I'm speaking to someone, the biggest why for me was talking to an emergency room physician in Chicago a couple of years ago, and he couldn't understand. He asked me, why was it that Black people, some people would be taken aback, but he said, I don't understand why Black people, when I see them in the emergency room, they don't do what I say. And they're back in the emergency room a month later. And so that let me know that there was a disconnect between the medical community and the Black community, with a lot of mistrust and misunderstandings. And It's my hope that we can build bridges and break down barriers because of the mistrust and the lack of information and research that is not being done in the Black community.
Well, thank you, Dionne, for your story, and also thank you for then moving it forward and helping others. So I know you're in the process of starting Rare and Black, and that's really exciting. So
Thank you for having me.
Fran?
Hello, I'm Fran Sverdrup, Associate Professor at St. Louis University. And prior to being here, I was in the pharmaceutical industry for 10 years, actually down at the Pfizer site in Chesterfield before that closed down. So in 2010, I moved here with some other Pfizer scientists, but the same year, my daughter was diagnosed with a rare disease, FSHD, which at the time I had never heard of. But it was fortuitous that I was now at a university where I could decide what I was going to do research on. So as a researcher with a child with a rare disease, I wanted to do really two things. One, become a patient advocate, and then begin research in the area and apply what I know in drug discovery to the disease. And this is where having a rare disease organization already started was absolutely critical for me.
Well, thank you. Stephanie.
Hi, thanks, Dina. My name's Stephanie, and my daughter, Raquel Gable, suffers from a rare disease called Wolfram Syndrome. And my personal experience with understanding the disease, I think, is a little different. I live in St. Louis from California, but moved to St. Louis. And St. Louis is kind of is the epicenter of Wolfram Syndrome research. So as soon as Raquel was diagnosed with this disease, I started working with a physician scientist by the name of Dr. Alan Permit. He's since passed away, but I was very, very lucky in the sense that I think Raquel was only the second one diagnosed with this disease in the state of Missouri, and they were excited, if you could use that term in the rare disease world, because she was so young and they were able to follow her. So I received a lot of specialists and physician recommendations from Dr. Alan Permit. And what we were lacking, as much as I had on the physician, and specialist side, what we were lacking was a community. I remember, Googling Wolfram Syndrome, and I could not find one foundation, association, parent group. There was nothing out there, literally in the world. I could not find anything. And that, to me, was my calling, because it's so important for a newly diagnosed mom or a dad or grandma, uncle, aunt to have a place to go, to be able to talk to other parents, to be able to talk to other patients about the disease that they're suffering. So our foundation, albeit is pretty small, we're pretty mighty. We've done a lot of great things. We're in the process of doing the very first global patient registry right now. And we do work hand in hand with, I kind of call him the guru of Wolfram Syndrome. The godfather, I think now, is Dr. Fumihiko Rano, and he works with Washington University. We work hand in hand. I wish I could clone this man, because he's so beneficial to so many people. There's a lot of physicians and scientists that you can't talk to. You hear about them, but it's like they're behind the green curtain. Fumi is not that person at all. I will speak to families, and then I will always introduce them to Dr. Urano, and he always texts them, or he'll set up a time to speak to them. And our partnering has helped WashU do a genetics clinic on Wolfram Syndrome. What used to take 3 months to find out if a child had really takes about 2 weeks now, because of the work Dr. Urano has been doing. So that's my story in a nutshell right there.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I think Dr. Urano is on with us. He emailed me this morning, so we'll see what he thinks about cloning him. So, But I really appreciate all of you sharing your stories and giving advice. And we've been talking about how important patient advocates are to the rare disease community, whether they're the voice with policymakers or researchers, industry, clinical trials, and what steps are needed to make this happen. And so each of you have a different really perspective. And I wanted to start with Dionne. I know that you have gone to Capitol Hill and been an advocate with policymakers. So
I'm sorry, I've muted myself.
that's all right.
Yeah, I've been to Capitol Hill for several reasons. Some of them have been for Medicare, certain things that Medicare won't pay for. I've been to Capitol Hill to advocate for, there is a database that the Immune Deficiency Foundation is instrumental in keeping medical records for people like me. And it's been, the NIH's funding was in jeopardy for the database. And in the grand scheme of things, it was a small amount of money in the grand scheme of the federal budget, but it was important nonetheless. And you all know, because of the amount of cures or treatments that rare diseases have, it's really a little fish in a big pond. And so I've gone to Capitol Hill for that reason and a few other things, but a lot of them are budgetary. And some have been for treatment, but we speak to different legislators. We are divided up. Usually they want us to speak to our own legislator, but depending on the committee that they're on, we get to speak to senators and representatives from other states, and that our face lends a voice to not just a bill, but a lot of times the Congress people don't read. It's just no way you can read all of that information. So it's important to show your face. If you can't show your face in person, what I have told people for some things that were important to me, call the Capitol on a Sunday evening if they're going to be something that's important that needs a voice and you don't really want to talk to a person. Call on a Sunday evening and leave a voicemail, because most of the people that answer the phone have to listen all the way through, and that way your voice is heard that way.
That's great. And as I look at the panel, I know that I think all of you have gone to DC really advocating for research dollars for rare disease. So thank you. So Callie, I know that you work closely with the Children's Mercy and the researchers, and you're a huge proponent for patients getting involved with clinical trials. So could you touch on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, we started this discussion early first on with Dr. Cole, is really innovation is at a turning point right now with rare disease. The changes in genomic medicine, how quickly, how the cost of it is coming down. And so I'm very fortunate. So I'm based in Kansas City, but as I shared, once we got a diagnosis, one of the first challenges is to find that network of providers that are going to be able to care for you. And so Children's Mercy was very open to thinking outside the box and building what Stephanie shared, WashU has done for Wolfram Syndrome, which is to build a coordinated care center, a place where families could access specialists, get all of their care, kind of one-stop shopping. And when you really think about the burden and the time it takes to manage a rare disease and how many specialists, how many times you have to take off of work, the families have to pull their child out of school, it's a lot. But then the next step is, once you kind of build that network in that place where patients and communities are coming together to build both that networking as well as that clinical side, now you have an opportunity to really advocate and to push research forward. And whether that is really designing and being part of the natural history studies that happen with rare disease, participating with the basic science of donating tissue types so that they can understand the basics of new rare diseases, or all the way up into the point of being involved, not only participating with clinical trials, but as Nicole shared earlier, really it's about being part of that initial, really having a seat at the table and being part of that patient participation in how do those clinical trials, what's important to the patient community? What are the outcomes going to look like that are very meaningful to the quality of life? A lot of clinical trials are done, well, this lab value is going to decrease. Well, but what does that mean to my overall quality of life or to that of my loved one? And so I think having those opportunities, and, you know, just like on the St. Louis side of the state, I know there's great opportunities to do and advance research, as well on the Kansas City side with the advancement of the Research Institute and really just advocating for that patient voice to be there from day one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kelly. So Stephanie, I know that you're working closely with like the industry side. So tell us a little bit about, as you work with FUMI and then with trying to find really a therapy for Wolfram Syndrome, how you collaborate.
I want to say first that without patient advocates, I think the rare disease journey is going to take a lot longer for whatever disease you have. So patient advocacy in whatever way you can play a part in that is significant. Researchers, when I first came into this whole realm, Washington University had their very first clinic, and it was with 10 patients from around the world, and they didn't have any more funding. So their whole entire clinic was going under. And if you're a parent and you're sitting there and you know nothing about this disease, and you have a couple researchers say that, you know, the clinic's going away, and you're sitting there going, well, what does that mean? And they say, well, we just don't have the money. You have to help these researchers. And they were all surprised when I put on a fundraiser and we raised enough money to support 2 years of researchers. That one researcher, Dr. Tamara Hershey, had tears in her eyes. She's like, people just don't do that for researchers. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I want to do this. I want to save my child. So it's so important to pull the researchers together. And like Nicole said earlier, get to know them. You need to let these researchers who sit in the lab a lot, and they're doing their own research, but they have no idea what the actual patient is really going through. So we've done that. I attend a symposium in France every 18 months, and there's a mom who has an association out there who brings all the top dogs on research for Wolfram Syndrome together. And she says, where are we? Because you don't want project that's being funded in Italy when they're doing it right here in the States. So that's really important. Clinical trials was another thing that I wanted to talk about. I know in the beginning, things were going really slow. And and Dr. Urano always used to say, Stephanie, research is a marathon, not a sprint. And I said, well, find something in the middle, start running a little faster, Fumi, because this isn't working for me. So I joke around with him a lot, but he our foundation brought on a chief medical officer who could kind of advise us, you know, on our own without any institutions or other researchers talking to us. And we actually helped move the needle on the very first clinical trial because it was going slow. And if there was a drug out there that we could use, why not test it? So from the time we brought our CMO on, 3 to 4 months later, mice trials were done. And then within a year, we were in our very first clinical safety trial. So you have to realize that even though you're a mom or a dad, I mean, I grew up in the sporting realm. I knew nothing about research. Follow your gut, and remember that you are an advocate for these kids, and really your voice and your actions can totally change the trajectory for your disease.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Fran, what do you have to add? Because coming from Pfizer with the industry and then with your research, I'm curious to hear what you think of the importance of patient advocates.
Well, I've always been focused on drug discovery research. And so when this came along, I had to try and do something. And so, when you're a researcher in academics, and I had never heard of this disease, so I'm paid to do something else, I had to find a way to pivot my research and enter the realm of facioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy. So, you know, the first thing my wife and I did was we looked for an existing patient organization. And lucky enough for us, the FSHD Society had been started by patients many years ago and was quite advanced. And so automatically there was a good source of information so that we could get up to date and know everything we could in terms of how we were going to bring up our child knowing they had this disease. And the second reason I looked for the patient organization was from a scientific point of view. Is there a science organization that studies this disease? Well, the FSH Society had grown to the point where they had started funding a number of researchers and nucleated a small group of scientists who started yearly meetings. And I'm like, I'm going to that meeting, and immediately was able to meet the other top researchers in the world who were studying this disease. And you know, at the time, I was not funded to do FSHD research, but I was able to meet people. And although I didn't know much about the disease at that point, I did have drug discovery in my background and wanted to apply that. So having this disease organization allowed me to meet these people and form collaborations right off the bat. So, you know, it was very important for me to get started. The FSHD Society then eventually did fund me with a small grant to get started, but I knew this organization was going to allow me to be successful because I'm not just a one-off researcher trying to get funding from the NIH to study this disease. I mean, I was on a mission. I needed to know what I was going to do might help in the end. So I met researchers, I started collaboration, I got some funding from the FSH Society, and then started working. And some initial successes in the lab led me to some industry collaborations to further my work towards the clinic. And it's been quite a journey, a lot of roller coaster ride along the way, but you know, having the FSH Society and patient advocates there, and I became a patient advocate along the way for sure. It allowed me to be successful, and it would have been very, very difficult had that not been there. So I certainly appreciate what it takes, you know, to start from the ground up, and it's so important for the patients to be involved.
Yeah, well, thank you, Fran. I will say in the chat box, I want to thank everyone they're sharing their personal stories about their granddaughters or their daughters being diagnosed, or maybe not yet being diagnosed. And so my next question to all of you is really resources available for families, whether it's statewide, whether it's national. And I know one reason we're doing this is because we feel like maybe there's a lack of an organization for families and those diagnosed with rare diseases to go to. And we hope from this, we can start some kind of initiative. But can you each answer what resources you think were helpful to you or that are available? Fran, I'll let you go first.
Resources. Again, I have to say the FSH Society had started organizing those research sources. So I didn't have to look far and wide. A lot of them were right there. And that was all started, you know, from the patients who initially had no idea about the disease. And it's a long, slow journey that happened, you know, before I ever knew what FSHD was. But I relied on these societies for almost all the resources.
Okay, thank you. Callie?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think there's a lot of great organizations out there. You know, some rare disease organizations are very lucky. As Fran pointed out, we already have designated ones that are specific to our diseases. And that gives you a huge jump start. I think Stephanie said when she first started advocating for her daughter, that wasn't out there. And so those that have them, I think they're great. Social media, Facebook pages has definitely advanced that, made that easier to connect with families, especially in ultra rare diseases where you might be 1 in 100 in the world. I think here in the United States, there's some really great organization, Global Genes, to really help those of us that want to move along in advocacy, how to do that. The Every Life Foundation, huge organization out in DC that really is focused on policy and all the policy issues that have to go with it. NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disease. I think the challenge that we face sometimes, which is part of the reason why we're here, is there's a lot of national organizations that support a lot of different rare diseases, and then there are disease specifics. But what we lack here in the United States sometimes are these local, because what happens at a national level is great, but a lot of families don't have the resources to participate with Rare Disease Day or go to some of the big organizational conferences. So what about those families in our own community? And what about not only the patients and families, but what about all the researchers and clinicians and industry partners, all of the stakeholders in our local communities that really can we elevate this discussion about collaboration? I think the theme I've heard all day is we can't move it forward, or at least as Stephanie said, not at a quick enough pace, unless we all come together as equal stakeholders. And so, 5 years ago, we started in Kansas City, we started an organization called Rare KC that really brings the energy in all of the stakeholders in Kansas City together to say, can we make this pathway, whether it's diagnostics, whether it's drug discovery, whether it's new treatments, can we make it go faster, sooner, better? And would love to be able to see that continue to grow across not only our region, but also partner with some of the other states to be able to build almost that grassroots effort that then bubbles up and meets all of the national organizations.
Well, I say kudos to you, Kelly. I mean, Rare KC is amazing. I've been to some of your events, and what an amazing organization that you founded. So thank you.
Thanks.
Stephanie?
Sure. I think rare disease is being placed on the map heavily. And I've been to a lot of symposiums put on by NORD, NIH, Every Life Foundation. And it's almost like, I think in the rare disease world, when people are diagnosed with cancer, you don't really hear what type of cancer they have. It's like, oh, I have cancer. The same for rare disease. There's so many rare diseases, over 8,000 rare diseases now, and a lot of children die from these, just like they die from cancer. So we're making our mark, and we're putting rare disease out there, which I think is fabulous. The NIH, I didn't hear that mentioned. The NIH is a phenomenal organization to reach out to, especially if you have some disease you've never heard of, if you can't find anything on the internet. They are very good. And again, Kelly, you stole all my organizations that I had written here, NORD, Global Genes, Every Life. Rely on your physicians as well. If your physicians know anything, they're going to help you. If they don't, then you need to just surf that internet. I mean, literally surf it until you can't surf it anymore. Someone out there with the same type of disease your child has. And then I know we have a mom in our community, Dr. Sarah Gladstone, I think she lives in Kansas City. She just put together the Wolfram Syndrome Research Alliance for our disease. And it is a phenomenal website that's bringing researchers together and a pipeline of all the information on Wolfram Syndrome. So researchers can go on and talk. Actually, families can go on and talk to other families. So it's just getting your patient advocacy going and just really trying to get your feelers out and start connecting with other people.
Yeah, thank you. Dionne, do you have any other resources to add to the list?
Kelly took mine too, but it's okay. No, I was also going to add, when I got diagnosed with primary immune deficiency, Google was my friend. But what I also want to let people know is the drug companies, which is small pharma, that there's only one treatment for us, which is a blood plasma serum. And what I found is a lot of the drug companies that treat this particular rare disease have patient buddies, that, if you will, people that they will pair you up with that have been through what you've been through, or they have children. And what I'm finding is a lot of times in the rare disease space, as Kelly and Stephanie and Nicole said, they were affected by a child. I was sick all my life and with different things, and nobody never knew. So I'm speaking from a middle-aged woman. So a lot of people would be, a lot of the drug companies that they would pair you up with, like a buddy or something like that, they either had it or their child had it, and they were a wealth of information. People that are patients and people, I found more information from mothers who had kids than the actual patient. So if you get into a situation where you're diagnosed or your child is diagnosed and that doctor gives you a medicine, Google the medicine, and a lot of times that medicine will come up and other medicines for the similar thing. And if you click on their website under resources, usually you can find magazines or things like that. And then for a limited time, sometimes they'll partner you with that person for a year. My first partner was in North Carolina, in the mountains of North Carolina. And we said we were going to get together someday, but we just haven't. But those drug companies, a lot of times, are a huge help. Because my doctors didn't know. They just didn't. Even the doctor that diagnosed me didn't really know where to point me to.
Thank you, Dionne. I'd like to bring Dr. Cole back and Nicole back to the discussion. I know, thank you, Nicole. You're answering some of the questions in the chat box. And I'd also like to thank Pat Fox. She has given a few resources, Missouri Family Partnership and the Heartland Genetics. And I know I had a question here for Dr. Cole. Here we go. Does the Undiagnosed Disease Network, like with other World Rare Disease organizations, how do they find other patients? How do you find patients?
So the way that the UDN works is that a patient and family partners with a referring physician, and there is an internet site which you can find by Googling UDN Gateway. And the referring physician writes a short summary of the patient's problems, and then the patient or the patient's family provides consent so that the Undiagnosed Diseases Network can retrieve medical records for the patient. And then the medical records are reviewed by the experts throughout the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, and a decision is made about whether it is likely that the patient has a genetic problem. And based on those decisions and acknowledging that there is a limited amount of resources, because as you saw from my brief presentation, each of the clinical sites only evaluates 15 to 30 patients per year. Some patients are accepted for further evaluation. So the bottom line is that you need to go through the gateway site of the UDN, and your primary care physician or referring doctor, could be a neurologist, could be another subspecialist, can help you.
Okay, thank you. I think, and Nicole, I know that you answered some of the questions, as I said, in the chat box. Thank you so much for that. We are recording this. We are going to provide the link to everyone, and we will also provide, if it's okay with the speakers, their email information, because Dionne, I know some people want to get in touch with you regarding Rare and Black. And I have one more question. When a patient presents with what appears to be a rare genetic disease, how often does whole genome sequencing fail to find a clear genetic cause?
Yeah, the current diagnostic success rate is somewhere between 30 and 45%. It depends a little bit on the patient population that is being examined. But one of the key goals of the Undiagnosed Diseases Network is to improve continuously the diagnostic success rate associated with whole genome sequencing. So there is a substantial amount of computational analysis that is constantly being upgraded and improved to permit increased discovery of potentially disease-causing variants in whole genome sequencing. And I'd say we're getting better and better every day. The other thing is we also reanalyze all of the cases about every 6 months to a year with our new computational pipelines to see if our new strategies can identify variants or problems that were overlooked in the original analysis of whole genome sequencing.
So Nicole, do you have any last words you'd like to share? Or I know, like I said, you've been talking to some of the participants in the chat box.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say, Kelly and Stephanie, I've been answering on your behalf for some. So just be prepared. But I think that there's just a lot of general questions, like frustrations with the diagnostic odyssey for parents that, you know, are getting no answers and hitting dead ends. And so there's a lot of questions in here about that process. Like when you get a no answer, where do you start looking next? And I know that there isn't like this really super succinct playbook for parents. Dionne, I know a lot of these are parents and I know you're a patient, so I didn't mean to not include you in this, but you know, I think that I think the reality is it's a journey and it's not easy and there isn't always one answer. And you have to kind of, like I said to one of you, put on your boots, your combat boots, and get out there and just start hitting it. And, but there are individuals and people that can help direct you on what's worked. And that's what I think is most important. And Stephanie and Kelly and Dionne, and sorry, Fran, all of you guys have experience in doing this. And it's, you know, you have to become a disease detective in a way. And sounds like that there's a lot of resources here locally in the area as well. So I've offered up my contact info. I'm sure everyone here on the call will, but you know, it takes a village, as Dr. Cole said, and I think we're all here to support all of you. So know you're not alone, and we can help y'all with some next steps.
Thank you. I will also say we have Emily Parks. She is a patient advocate in the young adult rare disease community, and she mentioned the Odyssey in Health Advocacy Summit are both great resources. And then she also mentions the Every Life Foundation, which I know most of you have worked with. So I can't thank you enough. Again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Rivervest, Washington University, St. Louis University, and Mid-America Transplant. The speakers for your passion, for bringing attention to this important need. We will be following up, as I said, with an email to everyone with the link of this seminar and also with contact information. But what our hope is that we can bring people together and really start a coordinated effort to really help parents and patients find the resources and guide them. So thank you all so much for joining us today.